You are watching the most OP Shatterpoint updates coming at you weekly. I am Omnis. I'm here with the Grand Accuser. Dude, are you ready to co-op this topic with me?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this one, so let's dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's not a whole lot of like Shatterpoint news going on, but there was this cool interview that Will Schick did with the guys over at Grey Squadron Gaming. If you want to check out the interview, that's up on YouTube. It is largely about Legion, but there was some Shatterpoint conversation going on in there. And about 47 minutes in, it hit something that I wanted to talk with my boy Accuser about. And he said, so Will Schick said that his favorite term was co-opetitive. See, I think that's the way he intends to say it. I had never heard this phrase before, ever in any of my gaming stuff. And I was just, before we get into his explanation, Accuser, had you ever heard someone say this phrase before?
Not before I watched that interview. So that was a new one for me, but it immediately spoke to me, so I'm excited to dig into what we're thinking about a little bit with it.
Perfect, perfect. So the beginning of his explanation started off with that he doesn't think the AMG games are competitive, and I bristled up. Right, like that's a phrase that when someone says it, I get on the defensive, and it is almost always followed by things that I really disagree with, or best case scenario, the person is just explaining poorly. And so I was all bristled, all defensive, ready to hate all of the next words that were coming out of his mouth. But then if I'm going to try to summarize his explanation, you can watch the video if you want to like hear it straight from the Will's mouth. But basically, what he's explaining is, there's an NFL game, right? Professional sports, where you have something that is truly competitive, where it does not matter how good one team is and how bad the other team is. They are obligated to play one another. And then there's tabletop minis games, which is a bit more nuanced, right? You have to both want to be there participating in this experience, which is where the kind of cooperative aspect comes in, that it's not purely 100% competitive, that there is a cooperative element to you're both trying to get the most out of a gaming experience. You're not cooperative in the sense of trying to get to the same goal. It's not like the way that House on Haunted Hill starts off, right, where you are all truly cooperative. But Accuser, I want to kick it over to you before I kind of like dive into my thoughts more. But what was your initial thoughts like after watching this clip from Schick?
I thought it was actually a really interesting take that I hadn't heard it before, but I mean, for me, being contractually obligated to show up to every game that I play, like, obviously not though, but like, I think that's a really interesting take that Schick has. You're not contractually obligated. No one's, as far as I know, no one's paid to play Shatterpoint unless someone's got an inside deal
Like
that I
that's
need to get in
there's
on.
some money, right? Like,
Well, maybe I wasn't invited, so.
Yeah, yeah.
But I
Not part
mean,
of your contract.
yeah. So like for most players, 99% I'll say, like you're showing up to play with a buddy, you're showing up to play with a friend, or you're playing in a tournament, and even a tournament, while
Yep.
it's a competitive environment, no one's making you show up to play. So I thought that was really interesting because ultimately, I look at games as like storytelling, and it's working together to kind of play out a story on the tabletop. It can be a competitive tournament, or it can be like one of the new narrative packs. But I find it like your storytelling with a friend is the way to look at it. Someone has to win. Like you can't watch them, Star Wars and not have someone win, but you're working together to kind of play that out in what's ultimately like a simulation of the movie.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And while you are definitely slightly more on like the narrative side of the spectrum, like if we imagine people's, various like where on one side you have very narrative, very casual. Like I'm not all the way on the competitive side, but I'm probably leaning more towards the competitive side
Yeah.
um than you. At least a little bit. I think that's fair to say. Not to say that you're
I
not
think I
better than me, just
appreciate
that
narrative more than you do. I think we've
yeah,
talked about this before.
that
Like,
is
I'm really
almost
excited about
certainly
the
true.
narrative stuff, but like for me, it's definitely like a very broad spectrum and depends on where I'm at. If I'm like drinking a beer with a buddy, I'm totally like, let's just throw something on the table and see what happens. But yeah, I can
And
turn
I
it on
enjoy
and off.
disrupting people's narrative. I will like happily play Obi-Wan and Darth Vader together and be like, "Oh, do you have a problem with this?
Oh, but you
Because
can
I
make
think
that a
it's fun as
story.
hell."
Yeah.
Yes. Um, but I thought it was great because you did mention tournaments, right? And you're like, well, you have both signed up, but I've played a lot of miniatures games now at this point, and I'm 15 plus years of miniature gaming and tournaments, and there are absolutely like my co-host from MCP show. He had a game at LVO where he literally um, withdrew. Basically, he conceded. He's like, "This game is not fun."
Hmm. I had a
You
few
know,
of those at
you
LVO.
you are in a different mindset than I am. Uh, Congratulations, you win. No problem. You know, and I've played in tournaments, right? Like I still have a memory of my first War Machine tournament where day two, my first time getting to a day two, my first game of day two was awful. It was one of those games that like it's kind of fine at the beginning, but as the game went on, it was just like I want to win at all costs, and it just wasn't fun. It was one of the worst experiences, and I think that's kind of what Schick is pointing at here is that we are all kind of working together to make a fun experience. And I would even go beyond a little bit of what he said, where there's a huge community aspect to all of this, right? Where,
Oh yeah.
you know, if you want to play a variety of people, that's fun. You have to kind of actively participate and be a cooperative element in making sure people know what to play, making sure people have a list that plays the characters that they want to play, but then also they feel good playing it in the tournament that happens once a month or whatever. And we all kind of work together to make sure that experience is good because we want that variety of players, we want that variety of matchups. We want all of those things. That makes the game more fun for me, but I have to actively cooperate with everyone else to make that happen. So this is a really interesting concept. Do you think there's anything where you're like, after listening to that this has changed your mindset at all, or maybe there's some things that you're looking at differently post watching Will Schick talk about this?
I'm not sure if it necessarily changed my mindset necessarily on the importance of the concept. I think he put a word to the definition, kind of the reverse
Yeah.
way you'd normally do it. The thing that it did kind of like make me think about a little bit, and I'm literally coming off a game with a local, like in the past 15 minutes before we started recording. For me, a lot of like what keeps people engaged and cooperating at the community level, and I think you hit on something interesting there with the community aspect, right? A lot of it is mindset driven, and not to kind of like dive back to our Sunday topic, but a lot of like building community and building like a community of players that want to get together and play with you is a lot of like your mindset and your attitude. And if you are not like approaching it in a cooperative manner, if you are not necessarily being the most sporting, or like very morose and not like engaged in that cooperative aspect of the experience of playing on the table with your buddy, it has a negative impact on the overall experience. So for me, it just kind of doubles down on the mindset and thinking about what kind of player am I at the tabletop, and am I making this enjoyable for my buddy so he wants to play me again? Because if you don't have a buddy, the game doesn't work. You can only
Right,
shadow box so
exactly.
much.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point. And for players to understand, if like maybe you're just like only have a couple of play partners or you just have a really fantastic community, you may not have been through this because I think for the most part, the AMG games have seemed to foster a very great co-opetitive community where even when you're competitive you want to have really great games, but in games of the past I have absolutely seen those experiences, right, where you're like, okay, measure something, all right, I'm gonna go ahead and shoot that guy, and your opponent's like, no, you're not in, and you're like, no dude, I'm totally in. Judge, you're
Yep.
in. And then you just have to do that like every single attack, and that is not fun and it drains the experience. And I think that's the kind of stuff that Schick is trying to talk about, where I try to very actively do this because I know it's not fun when you get to the point where like something is contested. And so I really try to be very positive when I'm going through opponent like throughout a game, right? Where, they're measuring stuff. I'm like, "Oh no, it's totally cool. You're in. Don't even stress about it. Like I can tell you're in." Or, even in the tournament just a couple weeks ago, there was a point where he was trying to shoot with Princess Leia on Chopper, who is still in my deck, but they're like on a point, right? He's just trying to get outside of two, still be on the point and shoot Chopper. I'm just like, bro, like, you might want to get within range two. This is Chopper, and he's like, oh yeah, and I was like, I just don't. That's not how I want to win a game,
Yeah,
right?
you don't want to cheese it.
Um,
You want it to feel fair, right?
Right. And I think there's elements of both sides working together, right? We've all been in that situation where you're like, "Oh, we're trying to measure this thing. Okay, I'll hold the measurement tool at the angle so that you can kind of like control your push, right? And then you put down the other because it's just kind of hard to do sometimes you're
Yeah.
navigating around models, and that does make this even at the highest tables that you want that kind of cooperative experience that keeps things clean, that doesn't end up with models nudged and that sort of stuff. And I try to be as positive and encouraging in all of those things. So when we get to a point where I do have to kind of like take a harsh line, I'm like, you just shoved your character up on the top of this gantry and you moved the other characters. Like, I don't think you fit, and you move that a little quick, right? And I know those moments are never fun, but I want to be as positive up until there isn't a genuine actual conflict. And I think it is okay to be like, dude, now I think you're breaking the rules a little bit. Can we step back? And like that's happened to me recently, and the guy was like, oh yeah, you're totally right. I totally just shoved those models. Like this is my fault. I Let me back up, right? um and so I think it's a really great point. I'm like, am I now going to use a Will Schick term? Like, I don't know where he heard it or if he came up with it, but I feel like we're going to say co-opetitive now. Do you feel like this is going to be a term that's going to actually leave your mouth?
It's going to come up for sure. I
Yeah.
think it's stuff that I'm thinking about generally in any sort of minis game, be it Shatterpoint, MCP, Legion. I play all three with varying degrees of regularity, but I think all of it comes back to just being a good member of your community, a good play partner, whether it's a regular play buddy that you practice your new stuff into, or you know someone you've just met for the first time. You want it to be a positive experience. You don't want it to be contentious. You're both there to have a good experience. Someone does have to lose. It's the nature of the game, but that's sometimes it's just the deck that gets you, but you can still have fun along the way.
Absolutely. Yep. And I think you play clean, you play supportive to your opponent. It's not like you need to let them cheat or anything, right? You still
No.
call someone when they get something wrong. Like every once in a while someone's like, hey, did you spend a force for that jump that you just did? I'm like, oh, you're totally right. I need to put that force. Make that kind of stuff as non-confrontational as possible so that you have a good, clean, fun game, because we all make little mistakes. And
Yeah.
let's just be gentle with each other and just get us to a good spot. I think we've said almost everything we want to say on this. Do you have any closing thoughts on being co-opetitive?
Yeah, and I think I mean the point that I think you're ultimately making, and especially like being not even just being forgiving, but showing your play partner, a little bit of grace, right? Like document, explain what your intent is, work together to solve it together on the tabletop within the bounds of the rules. Don't go knocking all the models out of the way to make your placement work. But assume until proven otherwise, your opponent has the best intentions. Show them grace and just play a good, clean game and have fun doing it. And I think that's co-opetitive in a nutshell.
Yes, exactly. And I think, it's like we all probably do this kind of stuff already. Where you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to jump up to this elevation level. And they kind of set their model up there and then want to get out the range two and be like, I want to be just within range two, or I want to be
Hmm.
just outside of range two, right? Like it's pretty clear what you're doing. You could absolutely
Yeah,
measure that, make sure that you're doing that. And it would be kind of a dick to be like, well, you jumped up here and you set your model there. I'm like,
yeah,
well, I was trying to get the model there because there's a lot of stuff to hold, and now I want to make sure that
yeah.
I'm in my exact spot. We know that I could land up there, right? And
Here's
I
my
think this is the
intent.
kind of
I'm going
stuff.
to adjust to that intent accordingly.
Exactly. And that's something that's, I think, been a part of these war games and miniatures games for a long time is declaring intent. And now Schick, or whoever he got the phrase from, is kind of hammering down. I mean, like, you got to understand, this is not just you. Like, I've played games against Magic players where I, like, go up to a tournament and then they never say, like, a word to me.
Yeah.
Right? There's, like, no interaction. It's just,
And
and,
it's
like, the game
never a
goes
good
one way or the other.
experience.
It's just kind of awkward. You're like,
Yeah.
how can you be that antisocial? And there's a reason why I love going to the game store, playing the game, interacting with people, scheduling a demo, being, co-opetitive. So
Yeah.
I think we're going to just wrap it up here. You got everything that you wanted to say out? You know
Yeah.
I love you. I can just listen to your voice forever.
We could if we don't cut ourselves off, we end up riffing for hours, and we'll be on how great Last Jedi is before we know it.
Exactly.
So we have to show some restraint for the next one.
We got to cut it somewhere, or we'll argue about Clone Wars versus Rebels, which is the best part of Star Wars, and
It's
it'll get
Rebels.
ugly. And we're trying to be co-opetitive right now, so it's definitely Clone Wars.
Makes for good content.
But I'll just close things out here. Hope you enjoyed a little short content. I'd like to do one of these a week. I'm going to close it out with the most OP thing that you can do. It's like and subscribe. It is a YouTube channel. Later, nerds.